Thanks for joining us. On this episode of Return to Base, we welcome Eric Horton, the Executive Director of Veteran Services for the state of Tennessee, and Michele Olive, the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement for the Commit Foundation.
Bravo Zulu, this is Victor Lima. We are RTB. This is Return to Base, a VeteranLife podcast.
All right, so welcome back to the Return to Base podcast. Today is a special episode. We have two guests instead of one, which is new for this podcast and something that we're going to try to do in the future. From Tennessee, we have Eric Horton, who's the Executive Director of Veteran Services, former Army guy, Army veteran, retired after 26 years, and was lucky enough to ride around with me in a Humvee a couple months ago in Veterans in Humvees Spilling Coffee. Also from Virginia Beach, Virginia, we have Michele Olive. That's Michele, 1L. Olive, spelled the traditional way, who is a member of, she's the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement at the Commit Foundation. Welcome to the podcast, guys. How you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Doing well.
Awesome. So did I get all that right? Did I get your introduction right? Michele, 1L. That's going to be your nickname from now on.
Michele with 1L.
Yeah.
People usually call me Michael because they don't realize it's Michele.
Michele. Also, Michele is coming to us from inside the space shuttle, I think. So, no, just kidding. In Virginia Beach, there's a huge Navy population there. So there's a ton of fighter jets and stuff flying overhead all the time. So if you hear that, she's not being abducted by aliens or anything. It's just part of the way of life in Virginia. How do you even get used to that?
I don't even hear it anymore.
You don't even hear it anymore. Okay, cool. Yeah. I visited Virginia Beach for school once, and I stayed kind of on the beach, and I was amazed. Just starting at like 5 a.m. every 5 minutes over the Atlantic Ocean, one plane after another. It was crazy, but it was a good time.
Well, they get it worse down there. Where we are is not quite as bad. And I say that I don't hear it. Like I obviously hear it. You just sort of tune it out and you don't realize it. I would literally just pause my conversation and talking to somebody and wait for it to pass by and then resume the conversation and like subconsciously don't even realize what you're doing. And when people aren't from here, they're just kind of like, what is going on?
I grew up in Southern California, San Diego, and we used to go to these plays and things like that at Balboa Park. And there's this like amphitheater, right, where they do Shakespeare basically and different plays. Anyways, it's right in path of Lindbergh Field. And when the planes start coming, it's like the people in the play literally press pause, don't move until the plane goes away. And if you're not accustomed to it, you're like, what the heck is going on here? So, but welcome from Virginia Beach. Appreciate you being here. And of course, Eric, how you doing today?
Yeah, pretty good, man. Just enjoying some sunshine over to the left, but man, just living the dream.
Good. So the topic of this conversation is kind of it's a heavy one to get through in the short amount of time that we have, but it's about building your brand, figuring out who you are, and then actually kind of the reverse. Figuring out who you are and then building your brand, building your following on LinkedIn with recruiters, et cetera. But for veterans, it's a difficult thing to do because I know when I was coming out and from a conversation that I've had with other veterans, when I was getting out, I had no idea who I was. I know I couldn't go out and be a Green Beret for Facebook or Google or anything like that. So I had to ask myself, what am I? And that was something that was pretty difficult to do because I had no idea what was out there. I had no idea what I'd be good at. I just thought, like everybody else in the Army, when you get put in a position, you'll learn it and then you'll try to find success. So Michele, if you want to talk about a little bit what you do at the Commit Foundation and how that relates to finding who people are, finding people's self, if you will.
Yeah. And I think probably like a lot of people in this space, my own journey was a little bit of a bumpy and somewhat funny one now that I look back at it, to get in here. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker, worked in mental health, and even getting to the part where I was in grad school was kind of hilarious all in itself. But nonetheless, this notion of like just wanting to help people, right? The plague of probably most social workers. And I ended up getting a job working at Little Creek Base because it was close to where I lived, probably more so than anything else, right? This wasn't like I had this calling to go work with the military. Mm-hmm. This was probably initially started out as like a convenience thing, but what it ended up turning into was that passion part. Like I really enjoyed this population. There's something special, right? And it's hard to really put your finger on it. But when I can see that as someone who's never had a military background of my own, and I try to tell people like that's the part where getting everyone else to realize and see it. This part of working, I did mental health there. I ended up doing some work embedded with some specific command groups, and then went over to DAMNAC and was embedded within a Naval Special Warfare Command in the psychology department. Again, mental health was always the focus. When I met Anne-Marie Craig, who is the CEO, or at the time was the CEO of the Commit Foundation, and when we had this conversation, I was really just kind of being nosy. A lot of the service members were going through and listening to her program and raving about it, talking about this really enlightened perspective that they were able to get on like who they are and what they wanted to do. And within a matter of a few minutes of our conversation, she really was able to even pick me apart of this. Like, you are not defined by what you do for your own job, even as a civilian, right? Like, why is it that you enjoy this? And when I was able to boil down those ingredients of like what it is about this role and stuff like that, and she's like, that's what I do for people every day. I help them figure out like, what is the passion behind it? What are those core values? What is their purpose? Because if you can figure that out, there's probably a lot of different roles and things to do on that in the civilian world that'll scratch all those itches. But too many of them are just going for like the next challenge, the next horizon. None of these people that we've generally been serving are truly at risk of unemployment. And so this is making sure that they find some place that they reinvest themselves at the right level, because they are such high performers, because they do have so much to offer, and helping them see that for themselves, helping them get that message across to the other side. And when you do, like it's beautiful. And it's really hard to explain this to a transitioning service member, I think, sometimes when you have that first conversation and there's like a lot of fear and there's a lot of doubt and that humbleness that almost becomes like self-deprecating sometimes, and getting them from there to like some place where they're like, I get it now. And I can see it. And I know exactly what you were talking about back in our first conversation.
Right. And I tell you what, as you said, clinical psychologist, correct?
No, clinical social worker.
Clinical social worker. I was going to say, if you had to choose a population to start in clinical social work or clinical psychology, Little Creek's probably a good place too, because those dudes are nuts. Let's face it. Just kidding. I got a lot of respect for the people out at Little Creek, but they could be a bit wild, right? So yeah,
a lot of divers there. A lot of divers. That's right. A lot of good guys. Very much fit, very fit, at least physically. But, that's interesting that you worked with that high performing type A population, and you see that those question marks or that hesitancy or even that self-doubt creep in to those people when it comes to transitioning, right? Absolutely. I mean, and a lot of this, we have a segment, we've often talked to folks through the difference between, I think, courage and confidence. Mm-hmm. And it really gets, because, you don't realize how much you rely on confidence in the military, but you train over and over and over for something before you execute on anything. So it's repeating something so many times that when it comes time to do it, you are confident. But in transition, there really isn't this like repeat training cycle that prepares you for this. Mm-hmm. So like, this is, there are pieces you can train for, but this is where you rely on the courage, right? Like thousands of small moments, and you have to take a step into an unknown and do things that you've never done before. And that's the part where I think the courage comes in.
Well, and I think some of that too, though, is not just a courage piece. It's you don't even know what questions to ask. You don't even know what to train for. And in those career, like where you were at Little Creek, they're trained to hide weaknesses because they need to perform all the time. So they've been ingrained to perform at all costs because the mission's greater than the man. And so you take that same drive and desire, and that could be, which is kind of a great piece that you've been able to solve, because if you took all of that away, right, and now you put them at the doorstep to jump out into something, they don't know where they're going, what they're doing. There's no support network. There's no communication. There's just an open, vast area. And so, getting them to be totally vulnerable enough to recognize, hey, I don't have to hide things. I have to be able to ask for things. And it's that courageous piece is powerful.
It's an interesting thing, right? So you go from a known that has a ton of built-in unknowns, right? So being in the military, a lot of times you don't know where you're going to be in 6 months. You don't know what missions you're going to do or what dangers you're going to face, but it's something that we acclimate to. And when we look at that DD 214 date, or, should I stay or should I go? I know when I had those opportunities to get out of the military, I was scared, early on. I was like, man, maybe I should just do this 20 years so I could get that pension. And I ultimately did do 20 years. I enjoyed my career in the military, which is why I stuck around. But I know that there are a lot of people out there who are just shell-shocked, frightened, and don't have any idea what they're going to do. What are some of the common things that you hear? I imagine it's like, I don't even know what's out there, right? Something similar to that?
Well, I mean, a lot of times I think it usually starts with that. Like you try to get them to tell me a little bit about yourself. And that's the first tripwire. Right. They were like,
I'm a good diver.
Yeah. Or, and sometimes I don't know if people realize how canned it tends to come across, but these general terms that people might use, and they're like, I'm a dynamic leader of, and it's like, what does that mean?
I hate elevator pitches. They feel so funny, but I know they're important. I'm not going to poo-poo on getting your 30-second elevator pitch, but it does end up coming across so forced.
Cliche and robotic.
Yeah,
exactly. It doesn't have to, though, right? I think if you can get to some of the truly authentic pieces, Cliff, what makes you, really you, that you could have a genuine conversation, then that's where the goodness happens. But yeah, the surface level. And some of that probably requires being vulnerable, right? Yeah. It requires probably a lot of introspection to sit back and do some of that. I don't know, I'd say the value alignment work, and really something beyond honor, courage, and commitment, right? But what really is going to get you out of bed every day with some fire in your belly? Right.
And I imagine in the community that you worked with, at least in my experience with folks from the community that you work with, a lot of them will say things like, I'm thinking about getting into venture capitalism or banking. And you're like, what does that mean to you? And that's really we kind of have an idea of who we think we're going to be, but only at a surface level. And you start asking that question, why do you want to get into venture capital? Why do you want to get into banking?
It always comes back to why.
Right.
And if you could have a really good answer to that why, great. Because there's probably a lot of other industries where you could also find that why. But then you just have to make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like I was going to say about that, why comes in many different forms and fashions. It's just what's the intrinsic thing that you hold valuable, right? And I've even heard it a lot. And I had a great conversation with a good friend that's here. July 3rd, we had there was a colleague that had actually, was a part of the 22 statistic, right? But we had just had conversations like a couple of days before that, and it was like, this guy said he had everything, right? He had a man cave that was just unbelievable. And when we were asking, like, hey man, what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm not going to do anything right now because I'm 100%, from the VA. So I've got that income. I'm retired, 28 years in the Army. So I got that income. I don't have a care in the world. I don't have a need in the world. Right. But at the end of the day, we kind of had this debate over again, like, how do we miss that? What happened? I don't understand, and we kind of came up to the conclusion that, what if it was his why wasn't tied to the financial security? His why was who he was, afterwards. Right. Once you take the uniform off, what's left? What is your intrinsic why that's going to bring value to you? And it can't be, revolving around an economic or a job. It has to be something much deeper than that. And and so I cringe now when I hear guys say, I'm not going to go to work, or I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to stay at home and go fish and hunt. And I'm like, that's going to be good enough for a little while. But what happens when it's not there anymore? What happens when you say it's too dang cold and I don't want to be out there? And you're so young. If you come in the military at 20 and you leave at 40 and you live to statistics says 80, that's half time in your football game of life. Like, you have a lot of fire left in you. If you don't know what that why is, the job's not going to give it to you. And not working is not going to give it to you. But that why has to be watered down enough to where you're gonna be able to find a purpose to get up and do something.
Yeah, that's an important part of it for sure. And something that I think a lot of people struggle with. If that why is, why are you going to work? I want to make a ton of money. Well, that's interesting. But you had mentioned that doesn't a lot of times bring self-satisfaction, right?
Right.
So you had something to add, Michele?
I was just thinking, that comes back to that life design, right? So I would usually, if I had to tell somebody they only had one thing that they could do, I would say like that core value piece, right? Because if you have a great awareness of what's important to you, and then you deliberately lead in your conversations and whatever about what's important to you, I feel like that opens doors. And, as long as you can listen, you can assess, you can figure out a good fit. There's a lot of things you can learn from just doing that one part. And, and if you do that one part, maybe you will realize that doing nothing is not going to be a good fit. You know what I mean? Or that you have other things that you want to focus on and how you want to spend your, design your life and how you want to spend your time. But I think if people do that piece around the value alignment, and as long as you can tell some good stories around it too, because that's good, right? Like, to be able to wrap it up with like, give me an example of why you think that matters to you. Well,
what you find out really quickly is that I'm just going to be blunt, is we find out that we're kind of full of shit, right? We think we have it together, but a lot of times we really don't. And I think that it's important that we recognize that as early as possible. And that's where organizations like the Commit Foundation and other, a lot of organizations are out there right now. It's pretty crowded, but most of them are very well-meaning. And I know the Commit Foundation has been around for a bit and really is there to help, but the veteran needs to go out a lot of times and ask for help, find the resources, and get some of those questions not answered for them, but at least get on a trail that leads them to the answers to those questions. So tell us a little bit more about the Commit Foundation, if you don't mind.
Yeah, we, coming up on our 10th year actually now, which is amazing, and in a pretty big state of, scale, if you would. But the focus has always been on a biz like quality over quantity. And so the notion of having an in-depth conversation, right? Someone who applies, talks to a director of veteran service, and we sit down and try to pull on those strings of like, which parts of this have you figured out? Which parts are you still like, do you still have gaps? And, I know a lot of people come with this, I call it like bias to action, right? This very tactical, I need a resume. I need to take some interview skills. And I'm like, dude, what do you even want to be? Like back up the bus a little bit and figure this out. Or even for the ones who say like, I want to go into venture capital. Great. Tell me a little bit more about that and why. And I think if you can even share and like normalize this notion of, I've had a lot of conversations with people who have the most impressive resumes. I mean, you look at I look at the piece of paper and I feel like I'm not even worthy of talking to them. And then you go and have a beer with them on a Friday night and find out that they're miserable. They're not okay. They're making lots of money and they think they failed in transition. They can't figure out where they went wrong. And often I think it comes down to they just didn't actually go after what was going to be a good fit, and it's sucking their souls. And so a lot of this, we try to get people at this place of like, figure out what fills your cup, figure out what's going to be a good fit. We can help you figure out how to go out and get it or find it and figure out the gaps from there. But there isn't a template to this approach. So I can't say that if you apply to Commit Foundation, you're going to get A, B, and C. It really kind of depends. Where are you? Where are you trying to go? What do you need to get there? And we do that. And we're able to say that we'll provide you as much or as little as you need along the way. And from a human standpoint, like that, it ends up being like relationships, right? I mean, Cliff, the people I'm talking to when they apply, like by the end of the journey, right? Like you're tight, and it's amazing. Because I know, by the way, some amazing veterans. I recently moved into this alumni side with the Commit Foundation because the other part of this is taking care of them going forward. Mm-hmm. So a few years down the road, if you decide you want to pivot, you can come back. For those who still want to serve, and I see a lot of that, like they miss their military family. I'm like, well, then come back and help us in this process where we're the next guy in line who's going from uniform to civilian, and really just bringing them back into the fold, which has been super exciting. Yeah. So you and I spoke about that recently. I'm still designing some of the components. So.
I can't wait to hear more about it, because I think it's an important piece is the family, the veteran family. And I've never asked for a call or assistance from a veteran who didn't say, let's hop on a call. Let me provide you all the help you need. And it's been pretty humbling, because I've talked to people from all the different services, minus the Space Force, which is it real? No, just kidding. I don't know if there's any Space Force veterans yet, but I've talked to people from all services. I'll just reach out to them on LinkedIn and say, hey, do you have a minute to talk about this company? And everybody's always been very helpful. But Michele, you mentioned that there's no template, right? But is there a methodology, or not mythology, a methodology or a kind of a path that you would recommend? And I know that probably step one is start freaking early, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes and no, because I see those folks who apply way too early, but they're not really like, it's not burning their brain. It's not keeping them up at night yet. And so there's things you can do early, right? The Design Your Life book, right? I think is a great example of going through some of those exercises, figuring that stuff out. I think there are pieces you can certainly start early. A lot of the tools that we have with executive coaching, we have this online platform kind of building out a bit of a baseball card. That stuff I think is probably best when you're in that 1 year out. And this is really kind of, and I say 1 year, again, there's no template for all this, but it also depends on what other variables are coming in. Is there a deployment in your last year? Gosh, I hope not. But I see a fair share of that. Is there, are you going to do a skill bridge, fellowship? And then like, that's going to back up the bus another 6 months and that type of stuff. And we've also recently we're rolling out some additional services for spouses to be able, who are also going to be transitioning, naturally as part of this as well, and making sure that we support them. And I think the more we can mitigate all the stress that's involved in this process, the better we can set people up for success. Yeah.
And what do you think is the preferred outcome, or, like the day you sign out on terminal leave, what does I'm not saying Commit Foundation wants you to be at X, but you as a service member should have at least an idea of where you're going. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I know people who build in taking a tactical time off, if you will, at the end of their journey.
Hiatus.
And if you think about it, there's not many opportunities in life to just say, I'm going to take a little time off. I've hard charged it for 20 plus years or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to take a little bit of a gap, get my batteries 100%, pay back some social capital to my family, whatever goes into that. And then come into that next chapter at 100% and be ready. I think that's fantastic. And the beauty of us not having rigid timelines of that's fine. And if there's pieces of this, however they want to attack this plan, that we'll be there to support it. If they want to be employed, if they want to be part-time employed, I laugh. Amory used to talk about, if you want to be a ballerina, we'll get you dance lessons and a tutu. I don't want to impose some artificial values that you need to do certain things. You need to make a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
I think you need to find whatever's going to be fulfilling. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's just doing nothing but volunteer work and making no money. Hey, if that works for you, there's not many people who fall in that bucket.
Some of them. Eric, let's kind of segue into your transition. I know that you transitioned in 2016. Is that right? Or
yep.
2016. So, from my experience, the amount of groups or individuals, organizations that are out there to help now, it's been year by year, it's been growing. There's a lot of them out there now, but in 2016 there was a lot less probably. And I don't know your particular transition story, but what was out there for you when you transitioned, and how did your transition go? And would you have benefited from a relationship like this?
So there actually, well, believe it or not, there was a lot of things that were available. And that goes back into what Michele had talked about with, when do you start? Earlier the start, the better, right? And I actually, so when I was going through recovery, because I actually was medically retired and I did 26 years, but at the 24-year mark, I kind of knew right off the bat I was going to have to retire. So I let the 1 year of recovery take place. And then I started the retirement paperwork exactly 1 year to the day of getting out. So I had 2 years to really already get the mindset wrapped around the process of retiring, not the impact emotionally of retiring, but the process. And it was a seamless process. Like the only thing that I was really focused on was hiring our heroes was a DoD skill bridge that had just been, kind of created a little bit before that. And so their first cohort at Fort Campbell, they started having conversations in May of 2015. And I had to apply for my packet in September of 2015 to start February of 2016. So I was well ahead of the game. I already knew it, right around 14, late 14, September 14, actually, that it was going to have to, the writing was on the wall, I was going to retire. But so I went to work with the process, right? Making sure I checked and hit key gates and everything else. But what wasn't built into that was the emotional impact of all that. And so everything on paper, I remember when I was, after we had the discussion and I knew the writing was on the wall, I was going to retire. My father-in-law, who retired from the Navy, actually called me up from Japan and said, "Hey, let me hear your plan." Right. And I said, "Hey, I got an A plan, B plan, C plan." Right. A plan was go to work. B plan was this. C plan was just take a year off. And he said, "Great. We're going to talk about this again in a couple months." Right. So a couple months went by. My A plan had turned into A.2, A.3. B plan, B.2, B.3, C plan, C.2.3. And he said, all right, great. That just means you have something to deviate from. Right. So I was like, holy crap. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I've processed this out. I've war gamed it. Right. And so when I started hiring our heroes, it really was the goal was to be placed with a company, do the internship, and then slide right into the job as a seamless part of Key Gate. Right. But I was seeing that the hiring our heroes piece, I was easy because I already knew what I was going to do. I had the pathway lined out. Right. But I was watching people in my class that had started a year out or over 18 months, really on average, about out. And their stress level was kind of like a roller coaster. Right. They're in the program. So they're on cloud 9, and then they would tank. Because 3 weeks into their cohort or their internship, they're like, well, this isn't what I like to do, or I don't know how to adapt. They're not listening to what I'm telling them to do, or they're not doing this, or they don't like it when I'm knife handing people. It's all these different cultural differences. And I would watch their emotions go up and down. And here I'm sitting here on Easy Street going, man, I like this company. Like, it's going great. I know what's going to happen when I stop. Right. But the more that I was in it, I was so focused on this. But I was seeing how it impacted my peers that they were confused because there was so many opportunities out there. There's so many agencies that were out there. They didn't know which one to choose. And I only put everything into hiring our heroes. And
that's interesting. So you're saying a lot of veterans out there were suffering from a bit of a analysis paralysis, where
100%.
Where you had your path kind of paved as at least you thought, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know from personal experience that I wouldn't say I had analysis paralysis, but it was a bit overwhelming sometimes, the different opportunities, because you only have time, or time is a finite resource, and you have to start allocating your time. And by the way, don't forget, you probably have a family. I had a family. So it's like, hey, I got to go to this networking thing. Why? What's the purpose of this networking thing? I don't know. Somebody told me I needed a network, so that's why I'm going. Right. Continue your story there.
Right. Yeah. And so sitting in the class for that 12 to, I think it was like 13 weeks, actually, I watched everybody's emotions do this, cloud 9, I'm in heaven. It's like the honeymoon phase. And then, oh man, this isn't the company I want to work at. Or networking thing. Like, what is that? We started doing every other Friday was like a networking event with some company. And so, or the briefers that would come in, and I was just, the closer that I started getting towards that exit, the finish line, right, the more convoluted the opportunities were kind of unraveling. And when I look back on it, I was like, nobody was talking about, so getting the job is going to do what? Who are you? What are you? What do you want to do? Did you take any tactical pauses so you can go spend time with your spouse? Because you probably haven't had time to unpack what life is going to look like. Is it a couple once you get out, right? Or how do you reconnect again? So all these different things started unraveling the closer that I got to it. And I think that was kind of, what kind of helped me look back on it and see what went wrong wasn't the process. What went wrong was the personal process, unpacking, what I wasn't, who I was, and things like that. And that's where I kind of look at what we have nowadays is even worse, because the sheer volume, or what, like, Olivia Nunn, Colonel Nunn just retired, and she called it 44,000 sea of goodwill. There's 44,000 agencies willing to help a veteran. So it's worse now for a veteran to kind of walk that path, because they don't know who. It's kind of like you're starving and you're going to a grocery store to go pick up one item, right? And you're walking past the buffet that had the fresh rotisserie chicken coming out, right? And you were sent to go get crackers in the back of the, the far end of the. So, I mean, you're just sitting there like that at a disadvantage these days, more so. And there's more resources available, but there's just not enough of the right resources that are helping people unpack the personality piece. So for me, so for me, the process, it couldn't have been more perfect. And that's not what went wrong. What went wrong was the person, how do you unpack, almost 3 decades of your life, and a lot of times it kind of, the hardest group of people that I always work with a lot of times is always the seniors, because, and to be totally transparent as well with you, our identity is wrapped around our rank and the badges we have on our chest. Right. We've done a great job of hiding weaknesses because we don't want to be dimed out, because we're weaker, the weakest link in that operation or that mission. Right. So we do great at hiding, masking the problems in the weak areas in order to show the biggest upfront piece, the best version of ourselves, which is fully transparent on our chests, right, and our rank. But at the end of the day, sometimes once we remove that and it's gone, what's left, right? If your identity was wrapped around that and that's all that is left now that's gone, like that's where everything starts to come unglued.
Yeah. So you went through this process.
Yeah.
You had all your accoutrement and your badges and your rank and your seniority in the military. You parlayed that into what, some people might think of it as an ideal career, but from our conversations, I know that you didn't find satisfaction in that first opportunity you had, right? And that kind of led you down a different path, right? Talk about that a little bit. You don't have to mention company names or anything if you don't want to.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you think of it like this, right? So there's two parts of the process that you just got divorced from, right? The military does a great job of indoctrinating you through 12 to 16 weeks of boot camp. Right? How to become a civilian that's 18 years old to become relatable to the military. When you leave the service, there's maybe 5 days if you're really giving it your 5 days. But in my case, I was probably sitting at the back of the classroom. I was so important on my BlackBerry and I wasn't listening to what I needed to listen to, possibly, and so when you all of a sudden now rip all that off and then you start work the next day, like for me, it was just the equivalent of being a fish out of water, right? I didn't know the culture. I started off immediately at the top when I didn't even know what the end user was using, right? I didn't understand the translational part of, dealing with a workforce that 93% have never served and didn't have the identity of who we were or our capabilities. And so now I didn't have the luxury of my rank telling you what to do. I didn't have the luxury of my positional importance could parlay that kind of buy-in without actually knowing what buy-in meant, right? And so that's when things really started to go south for me. Was I just didn't know the culture. I didn't know what it meant to be in charge of, 1,500 other people that are over 40 that are going to tell me to go pound sand when I go tell them to, go do something, right? Whereas I'm so used to that level of commitment. And I think for me, one of the first red light moments that came on for me was, oh my goodness, was when an individual didn't go do something that I told him to do, it would have been normal for me, which was if one of my soldiers would have called and said, hey, I have a flat tire, my response would have been like, hey, let's go get him. Right. If he didn't show up for work that morning, it's not, hey, where's he at? Oh, he had a flat tire. It's like, we've got things to do, go get him. And so for me, when I told one of the supervisors, like, hey, did you go get them? Like they called out because I had a flat tire and you needed that person, but you didn't go get them. Like, to me, it seemed like a no-brainer. And so that was the first thing for me was, wow, I'm working in a workforce that is not as committed to work as I am. And how do I relate? How do I understand that piece, right? And there wasn't a person there to kind of mediate between it. And so, the next, it just was one incident after another of similar things like that. Was like, wow, I'm really in a foreign environment that I don't have the support. Right. I don't. And my wife had kind of constantly reiterated me to that. She's like, honey, they're not your battle buddies anymore. And I'm thinking I have colleagues that I can lean out on, and one of the other light bulb that was kind of one of the biggest triggers, I think, for me was I didn't take a vacation when I retired. I literally during Memorial Day weekend at my retirement ceremony, they asked if I could start to work actually that Saturday. And I said, yeah, I'll go. Right. Because we go when we're called upon. And so not taking that time period when I actually did make a vacation time to go to Hawaii with my spouse for an anniversary. I went and told my boss, he was like, yeah, what are you doing? Like, those are your buildings. And I was like, I know, but so-and-so is going to cover down and this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And he was like, yeah, but those are your buildings. Like, what are you going to do about this? And I was like, oh, wow, this is an implied task that I still have to maintain work while I'm on vacation. And that's when I was like, holy crap, nobody's going to pay you $100,000, not own you for $100,000. And that's when things really started going south. I was like, man, I didn't take time for myself. I didn't take time for my spouse. I didn't take time for all these things. And that's when the first domino, I think for me, was at that point, I was already so far removed from the cultural differences. In corporate life, it's pretty brutal, right? Most corporate C-suite executives they've accepted a role knowing they're looking for the next position in 2 years or less. And sometimes they can be fired in the next quarter, right? Q1 earning report says this. And that level of constant stress, was kind of another, like I said, the big domino for me that just started falling. And then it was just one more thing packed onto it after another. It wasn't that I didn't know the job. It was the fact that I didn't know the culture and the environment of things, So
did you rip off the Band-Aid one day?
Well, I did. So I think for me, honestly, was, like I said, 9 months into the role, they called me to come back, and my day started right around 4:30. I was still trying to do PT. So I would get up at 4:30, and I was commuting an hour, one way on a good day. It could be 3 hours on a bad day, to Nashville. And so my day started at 4:30. I would get up and go up to do PT, and then 5 o'clock I'd be on the road, or 5:30, roughly by 6 o'clock I'd be on the road. And then I wouldn't get home till like 8:30 at night. And so this one Friday, they'd actually called me to come back because somebody was screwing something up. Right. And so I was like, how is it they're not holding that person accountable instead of making me come back in? And it kind of revolved around, something that I'd heard when I was a young soldier was like, the harder you work, the harder you're going to get screwed. Right. And in this case, that's where, I was going to be able to deliver, and they weren't going to hold the other person accountable. They were just going to bring their solution in corporate was to bring the person who's going to solve the problem in no matter what. Right. Regardless of his situation, his family, and I literally was so enraged and angry at that point from everything that had gone wrong. I literally pulled over on the side of the road, and I mean, it was just like by the grace of God that I just found my way back into the vehicle and made it home. I didn't even go back. Wow. And I came back, and then that's when I gave him, hey, we need to have a discussion about this. Right. And finally I just gave him a 30-day notice and said, hey, I'll stay long enough for you to find somebody, and then I'll right seat, left seat with them. And then, and their solution was, we'll give you a 10% raise if you stay. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, there's no amount of money that can solve this problem.
Number one, you were being underpaid, obviously. And number two, you're right. There's no amount of money. Michele, do you see at the Commit Foundation, these, I don't know what you call them. They're the veterans who kind of have it figured out, and then it doesn't work out. And so now they're 1 or 2 years out, and they give you a call and say, hey, Michele, I'm having some issues. Let's have a conversation. Do you see that often at the Commit Foundation?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say often, but I certainly see it. And in the beginning, it was really difficult for me. I took it personal, right? That like we went through all this introspective work. You can do all the right things and still land in a role that is misaligned with you. And like, kind of that notion of like, what did we do wrong? Right. This notion, transition or tension of opposites, right? That transition can be really exciting and full of opportunities. And at the same time, like it's full of uncertainty and change. And I think the human nature, like we try to like think of it like it can only be one or the other, right? But that it can be both at this very same time, like scary and exciting. And I think the elephant sometimes in the room is like fear in transition and the danger of ignoring it. Because I see people who try to like just like we've always done, probably conditioning, right? We ignore the fear, we suppress it, and we keep charging. And if anything, we just work harder and we will outpower the fear. And I think the danger of ignoring the scary parts of transition is that it takes the wheel and becomes the driver. And you can see this where people become reactive. They start ignoring all the things that they've already talked about and values and ideals. They can know this stuff. I've literally sat down with people and said that they are like completely in the wrong place. I'm like, all right, what are your top values? Walk me through this real quick. And they could rattle them off on the top of their head. Okay. What are the decisions that when you're making your decisions when it comes to careers, what are you basing them off of? Money. but you didn't list the money, or you didn't say any of that when I just asked you what was supposed to be driving this. And, but so I think the shiny objects of like, it's really sexy to make a lot of money, or a certain title, or a certain company that has a certain brand. And I get it. That's attractive. I call that like the shiny object syndrome. Maybe it's not a good fit, but it sure looks nice. And then I think sometimes just that fear reaction, getting tactical, ignoring all the things that and focusing on, kind of become a lot more myopic of what they're going to do. And it can lead us in the wrong place.
Yeah. And I wanted to add on that, because that was the biggest driver for me. Was I thought I was worth six figures, which I am, but I've tied my value to a number. And I actually have had multiple conversations with some good colleagues. And one that stood out the most for me was Colonel Rob Campbell. And in his last book, he said, we rush to compromise the very values we fought to save because we have too much stuff and we have to go make the money. And that stuck out, because that's exactly, I thought I deserved to be, which, it was an entitled mentality because of my experience, my training. I am this, my value is tied to that sexy salary. Right. And I was like, that couldn't have been more opposite of me. Right. I wasn't geared towards that. I was chasing that because I wanted that. Again, the fruit salad on the chest now needed to be the fruit salad with a brand at a company and a salary. Right. Mm-hmm. So my perspective was so skewed because, and everybody in my class, when I started unpacking it, was exactly the same way. They were chasing the job that had the stature and the money that defined their success. And that's when over the years now, that's ultimately what I've said was I've seen some of the happiest people, that just drill a widget for a manufacturing floor, and they could have been a 30-year retired sergeant major, but they've never been happier. And so could they have done this? Absolutely. But what are we chasing, and what are we defining as success for ourselves, and getting to the root analysis of, what do we really want? What do we really value? What do we,
Yeah, I hear all these things about what do we value, and a lot of respect for that. And I think that it's extremely important, but I have this feeling that there's a bit of reality that ends up sinking in eventually. I did a poll on LinkedIn where I had a few different options about, hey, why did you accept that first job? And one of the options was it's a known company like, Facebook or Google or whatever, Amazon. The other option was it was my dream job. And one of the options was it was the only offer I had. Right. And guess what? Like 80% of the respondents, something like 80%, don't quote me on it. I'm going to have some fact checkers come after me, but most people accepted their first job out of the military because it was the only offer on the table. Right. And so I think it goes back to that idea that we're all kind of robots, computers programmed to execute a decision in front of us. Right. And so with that, you get to that juncture, you have, when you start your transition, it's a funnel. You have the world of options out there. You could go back to school, you could start a new career, you could be an entrepreneur. And as the days and months go by, there's less and less and less and less and less options. And you're whittling them away as you should. But then at the end of the day, when the rubber meets the road and you're like, all right, I need to have, how many times have you guys heard this? I need to have an offer on the table by the first of this month because I need to start working the first of the following month. Right. And then they have one offer on the table and, hey, I'll take it. And guess what? A lot of times people don't end up very happy that way. I know my first job out of the military, I had one offer basically, and I took it. It didn't work out. You're going to say something, Michele?
Well, and I remuted for jet noise, but but you bring up a good point. A lot of transition is making or taking the best next step. And whatever your options, if they're limited or they're whatever, like what is the best next step? And as long as they have the realization, like this isn't another 20-year commitment, right? Or
that's an interesting thing though, Michele, is not most, but a lot of the people who are leaving the military, especially the career people, they made a 20-year decision, right? So, it's like the old generations where I got out of the military, after 20 years, and I went to work for GE for 20 years, right? And we kind of have, a lot of us kind of have that in our mind, right? Our parents, right? And, you said we take the next step, right? Based on the options we have. And sometimes right. Or at least what we think is the best. But given the choice between, all right, take the only offer on the table or start over and have no job. That's why people end up working during terminal leave. It's not because they want to double dip. It's because they're like, I need to have an income, and this gives me no downtime without an income, I think, in my opinion.
I see less and less of that.
That's good.
That's that. I mean, if I had to say like some interesting trends I've noticed over the past few years, and maybe that's a pandemic influence thing, who knows? But, if I teaching people that I hear a lot of people ask, when is it okay to leave?
Right.
And I love,
when is it okay to leave what?
An organization.
Gotcha.
If you take a job, when are you allowed, this notion of pivoting again, which just is mind blowing when you haven't even maybe taken that first step. Right. But, Jürgen Heitmann's one of our mentor for us. And I remember hearing him speak one time at a program, and he talked about the notion of, if you've done what you came to do and you left the place better than you found it, then you owe them nothing. And just, I think that this idea of giving people permission to being able to move on, or U.S. Olympic Committee is fantastic. Hearing, they use, by the way, Design Your Life in their transition program as well with the athletes. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because to an athlete, the notion of failure is a learning opportunity.
Right.
And to a military member, you talk about failure. I mean, probably the first thing that comes to mind is somebody died, right? Failure just has a completely different connotation. And so when they go into another career, they go into civilian sector, this notion of having quote unquote failure is really scary. Whereas to maybe someone who's been an Olympic athlete, they're like, yeah, well, that didn't work. What did I learn from it?
Man, that is so insightful, because I've been on training ops and in real world ops where maybe things didn't go so well. And, at the end of the day, kind of look at each other and did anybody die? No. Then we're good. Okay. So that is drilled into people in the military is exactly what you said. So we do have a fear of failure. And go ahead.
I was going to say, it's funny that she brought that up, because I think it was about 5 days ago, I did a post, this is what's going to happen, right? 2 to 3 jobs in 3 to 5 years. I had 7,000 people pick it up, and I had over 600 people message me over it. And it was all revolved around that. And that's exactly what related to me, was when I hit that wall, and I was like, I can't believe I can't make this work. Right. And I remember one instance where my wife I was starting to wake up, and I would just lay there instead of get up and go work out. And she could feel the tension and the negativity. And she said, just quit. And it wasn't that she was being very negative and, with it. She was just like, we don't need this. You don't need this. We're okay. But it was the fact that she said, quit. And I was like, I have never quit anything in my life. I don't care how hot, how cold, how long the road march is, how much the wait was. I don't care. I don't quit. And I was like, and that's where I made because it happens a lot where we take the first job that we have, And then we feel like we're beholden to it because we're loyal as a fault in a lot of ways. But we, for some reason, while we're in the Army and we do something, a mission didn't go so good, what do? We do a hot wash and an AAR afterwards. What went right? What went wrong? How do we not repeat those mistakes? Right. We don't do that in the civilian sector. And so we get that first job because it was the only offer and it sucks and we hate it and we're miserable, but quitting is not an option. Right. And that was where I was like, it's okay. Right. And I started telling people over the years, I've started saying, this is exactly what's going to happen. You're going to accept the first job offer and the real job that you really wanted is probably going to come to fruition in about 3 or 4 weeks because it takes time to get that job. Now, what do? Now you're faced with, that's the job I wanted. Do I now quit the company that I just accepted the offer with? Right. It's how we view quitting. When do I leave? As such a negative tone and impact to our worth and our value system again, right? Like what are we tied to? And I was like, it's okay. You're going to change jobs, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's not quitting. That's failure in motion. That's failure in progress. And I see it all the time where people they'll let that job that they really wanted pass them by. Now they're sitting in a job that they didn't want. And now they're even angrier because that job they really might have wanted is now gone. And now they're angry, not just where they're at. It's what decision that they just let fly by because of loyalty. And they don't know how to deal with that. And that snowballs into a bunch of other, things as well.
You know what? And Eric, I love what you just said, because the notion of loyalty, I see so much of that value and attribute in a lot of military. And it's amazing. It's why I think I respect and adore military members the way I do. It's one of my top values. So like, first of all, I'll just own that piece. But realizing that where sometimes our values, finding an organization, finding a job that aligns with them is great. And also realizing when they're getting in our own way, because I'm loyal. Yeah. I gave them my word. I accepted that job and it's not the job I wanted. I really want this other job, but I'm not going to be disloyal because that would just go against, I couldn't live with myself. Right. And sometimes I think some of our own value systems get in our own way.
Isn't that interesting though, is when the funny thing about being in the military is you can be fired from a position, but you're still going to get paid.
Yeah. 100%.
Most of the time, unless you do something egregious and they're like, go home and never come back. But you're also in a position where the military can't fire you really, right? There's ways to do it, but it's a long bureaucratic process. But when you get out, you do have that loyalty for that position. You want to do what you said you were going to do, give it your all at least. But, I've told people have come to me and asked me my opinion about, hey, I don't like this job or whatever. And I just tell them, I'm like, if they didn't want you, if for some reason that company you're working for on Friday said, you know what, we could do without Eric. On Friday, somebody's going to call you in the office and they're going to say, hey, thanks for coming. Don't come back. Right. So we live mostly, I guess most states live in a at will environment where employment is at will. So we have to give, if you quit a company, it's tradition, or at least, commonplace to give a few weeks notice. Hey, I'm going to be gone in a couple of weeks, but they can tell you just go away. And really, they don't have to give you a severance or anything like that. So I tell people, if you're really unhappy, you're not going to be giving your best effort. You're not going to be providing the output that you're expected to give. So just rip the Band-Aid off. Don't feel that you owe, this sounds horrible, but don't feel like you really owe corporate America anything, right? If you're not happy, it's not going to work out for you. It's not going to work out for them. It's not going to work out for your family. And you actually are in a position now to say, all right, I'm going to give you a couple weeks notice, and then I'm going to go away. and I'll be happier for it. And I think that people should
and they
do
have
that.
systems in place, and they have systems in place that they can easily replace you. It's the same as in the Army, right? The Army's machine does not stop moving because Eric Horton's not there.
That's right.
That corporate arena, they're gonna still keep going. They're just somebody's gonna get overburdened with your extra work until they can get a replacement. And that's just normal, right? You not saying be a serial job hopper.
Definitely not.
You definitely need to value your, and I say it a lot of times, this is really even more important. The way I look at it is you have to be the best ambassador for what it means to be a veteran, because if you do it wrong and you go in on a Monday and say, that's it, I'm not, I don't want to be here, I'm quit, right? With no notice or anything else, they're not just blaming you. They're going to label all of us veterans that, the last veteran we hired did this to us, right?
Right.
So just at least have a common respect to give them the notice, but don't be loyal to a fault, right? And don't try to keep dealing with it either, because sometimes you're not going to even be able to deal with it, on your own, at least, without getting help. And I would even try to rationalize when I would say the same thing. I would say, Jesus Christ, I don't see how these people are getting so worked up. It's boxes, not bodies, right? But it was just mind blown to me how they could,
boxes, not bodies.
Yeah, I remember saying that on more than one. We would do it. So any company that's a publicly traded company belongs to what they call Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is, you're projecting quarterly earnings reports versus your actual corporate, and so, man, I would see these people, it would be an all-nighter the night before the end of the queue. And I'm like, man, these people really get worked up over, these boxes. And I'm like, how can I not deal with this? Because it's boxes, not bodies. Like, Eric, what's wrong with me? Right.
What is wrong with you, man?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I couldn't figure it out.
I think this is a good chance to segue so we talked a lot about who you are, finding out who you are, different ways to do that, even what is that word I'm looking for? Experientially? That's not the word. Anyways, Eric, you are somewhat of an expert, I think, at least, on telling your story, right? So tell us a little bit how you discovered LinkedIn and what it's done for you and how other people can use that to tell their own story and to get their brand, their image, their personality out there.
Right. Well, the best thing that I learned, so immediately when I left the position that I was in, I immediately looked at the value that LinkedIn could provide, right? Which was, I had to tell our story, right? I had to go back and I had to say, hey, look, this is what I did wrong. I know I can't be the only guy out here, right? And the more that I started being transparent and started leveraging telling the story, I started seeing a big movement take place, right? Which is, how do we talk more about our experiences so that leveraging that as this is now my brand, right? This is who I am, what I'm passionate about doing. Well, I started looking at that like, you could do the same thing. What if you're an IT project manager and you say, I like this, right? And I've dealt with another good colleague that was a former infantry, 11 Zulu, right? First Sergeant Infantry, but he really loved IT and had no college, had no project management piece, no certifications, but he ended up becoming a project manager in an IT division for a very, very large company. And it became like, well, you need to tell your story, because there's a lot of veterans that I knew that had hobbies that they could now do that in the civilian sector that might transcend their lapses and be able to share it. So that's your brand. What do you like to do? Tell your story, right? How do you sell your capabilities? And the more often that you got into LinkedIn and started talking about that, well, guess what? That's now your elevator pitch, right? It's a genuine conversation with not just you, but other peers and other colleagues that are in companies that you may want to work for, or they might find value in what you're giving. And so leveraging LinkedIn was just a way for me as a coping mechanism, honestly, was because I still wanted a service. I wanted to tell my battle buddies the experience that I just experienced. But I kind of recognize that, hey, I can't be the only guy here that's went through this. And it just grew and grew. Right. And I'm not the only anomaly with this. Like everybody else can do the exact same thing. It's going to help you ease the conversations when I say, tell me about yourself. Right, give me your elevator pitch. Right, it's just going to help you build who you are as a brand. And I hate to use that term all the time, but really, it's what are you and who are you and what do you want to do? Right, and tell everybody that. And let's start having conversations about it. Don't put just your best foot Instagram filter forward. Let's talk about the dirt as well, right? And share, because that also shows that you're a human being. I would much rather buy from a human being that I can relate to than just somebody that just throws up this fictitious image of, perfection, because I know at the end of the day, you're going to get tried eventually and you're going to be tested against that. And I want to see how well you perform underneath that. And if I don't have anything to go off on, then using LinkedIn as a way to be transparent and honest and genuine with it, that's just going to be great way for you to unpack your brand.
Right.
And it's worked very well for me.
How does Joe Schmo, who's getting out in 18 months, how does he get started with this journey on LinkedIn? I know, like when I was getting out, I was a little bit reluctant. I didn't want to put myself out there. Slowly but surely, I've posted a few things that have had pretty good response, but I was pretty reluctant at first, at least to show myself, to say, hey, look at me. And without the Instagram lens that you had mentioned, right? But how does one get started to tell their story and engage on LinkedIn?
So what was the number one thing that you did? The way I looked at it from this perspective was, as a logistician, the first thing that I ever did before I deployed was I started making conversations with the person that I was going to rip out with, right? Or the person that I was going to do a handoff from. Right. So they're getting ready to leave, but I need to know what I'm getting into. So what do? I network with the individual on the other end. And I say, hey, man, we're getting ready to rip out. I'll be there. We'll do a PDSS or pre-deployment site survey. I want to know as much about that battlefield as you know. Right. LinkedIn is a battlefield, just in a different geographical location. Right. Start having conversations with those individuals now that have already gone through it, are already there, have already, you are getting ready to deploy essentially when you retire. It's a different battlefield. It's a different area of operation, different area of support, different area. Everything is different, right? Treat it like that. So building your brand before you start talking about your brand is build it. How do I build it? By building awareness, by reaching out to people that have done it, already there. Right. So don't just immediately jump into LinkedIn and say, I'm just going to start posting something. That has nothing to do with who you are. Right. So reach out to the individuals. Right. Go deploy to LinkedIn and start having conversations with those people that you're getting ready to rip out with and say, hey, what can I do differently? What am I walking into? And then the more that you start having those conversations, the commonality of somebody saying, who are you is broad. Right. But somebody's going to ask you that. Somebody's going to share your tribe. Right. Somebody's going to share what color's your parachute, design your life. Somebody's going to share these tools. And if you're halfway worth the leader that you say you were in the military, you would be leaning out and trying to gain as much battlefield intelligence or find the node as possible. Right. And do that. And then eventually it's going to start working around. Okay. So now you know who you are. Now you've been armed with a lot of great battlefield intelligence. Right. Now you can start talking about and broadcasting who you are, what your capabilities are, and then start going into a different phase of that operation, which is I need to find my way into a company because now I know who I am. I know that's who I want to work for. So now I need to start leveraging LinkedIn by being marketable to everybody that's out there, and then sharing what I can do differently, right? Than just posting his job online. So those are kind of the way that I look at LinkedIn, right? And in a nutshell, and it works.
Yeah. And if you want to please touch on a little bit about what the state of Tennessee is doing for veterans now. I know we're running low on time, so no pressure, but be concise, Eric, for God's sakes. No, tell us a little bit about what Tennessee's got going on and who you're working for and what we can look forward to.
Yeah, so Tennessee has recognized immensely the value that veterans have and bring to the workforce. Tennessee is not an anomaly. Every state is going through a workforce labor shortage, right? The difference is not a lot of people have leveraged the military's capabilities by doing direct link outreach. And that's what Tennessee is doing different, is we're trying to leverage the fact that we are geographically blessed and that we can reach, the state of Tennessee can reach 78% of the U.S. population within a one day. So every industry is here, but we're surrounded by 8 states that have massive veteran populations. We have a huge workforce need. And so my charge has been to grow the veteran awareness of what benefits that Tennessee offers, like no property tax. Just there's tons of benefits that Tennessee offers, as well as tax-free. All these different living expenses which I wasn't dissing on Virginia, but Virginia is terrible for veterans when they retire. Just the sheer volume of money that they take back from you is just amazing. Anyway, so Tennessee is trying to spotlight everything that makes us unique. The job opportunities with Oracle and Ford. Ford recently did a big announcement of $5.6 billion investment to build a new e-vehicle. And all the governor looks at now is he really wants to take care of veterans. He recognizes the value and he wants to do everything he can to promote the workforce for veterans to come from the different surrounding states, because we have a huge need. And we recognize, from the veterans that even he's been surrounded with, he understands, holy crap, why haven't we done this before? Like, let's go after these guys. They really can solve a lot of problems that we have. And so now it's just trying to bring a greater awareness of the benefits that you have here, the greater opportunity that you have here, and then the quality of life that you'll have here. And so that's what we're working on right now. And one of those big things is the bike ride that we're going to do in the spring. Right. So I'm going to ride a bike from Memphis to from West Tennessee, Memphis to Kingston and Kingsport in East Tennessee over about a 23 day period to stop at each different American Job Center and spotlight those companies in that area. And then to try to bring awareness to what Tennessee has across the state, to both employers' side on veterans that are in their area, as well as veterans that are outside the area, like, hey, I didn't know that was available in Kingsport. So that's what we're trying to do too, is do that big movement just to bring more awareness to veterans in Tennessee and corporations to veterans in Tennessee. So
awesome. And Michele, what does the Commit Foundation have going on, and what can we look forward to in the future from your organization?
We're going to just continue to, I think, quality at scale is what I'll call it, because we certainly are growing. For the folks who are coming through and want to figure out who they are and where they want to go. From a workshop standpoint, we're going to be in Tennessee, right, in Nashville in February, I think 24th and 25th. Those workshop events are more of a capstone. We plan to have, I believe, 10 of those next year. But it's a journey, right? So I'd say, without giving too large of promises, people are interested to go to our website. They should check it out. If it really resonates with them, they should apply and let us be a part of that journey. Mm-hmm. And the good news is, we're pretty flexible. So if they want to use any of the other 44,000 veterans organizations out there, they can do those in tandem, because we try to make sure what we're doing complements what they're already working on. And that's that flexibility just makes it easy. Right.
And what's the website?
www.commitfoundation.org. COMMIT.
And we'll have that in the show notes, of course, along with Michele and Eric's LinkedIn profiles and any other socials that are associated with the Commit Foundation and the state of Tennessee Veterans Outreach, which, by the way, I don't know if there is there an Instagram page for Veteran Outreach in Tennessee?
There's not. The only thing we're actually working on right now
There's fixing to be.
Yeah. LinkedIn Music City was trying to close a lot of those gaps. So we're working on that.
Great. Well, I appreciate both of you guys being on the podcast with me, and we covered a lot of ground and not enough time, as always. But I think that, the state of the veteran engagement, or the veteran market for how do I say this? I think that the state of where veterans are right now is great, but it's only getting better because there's organizations like the Commit Foundation and 44,000 others, of which probably, I don't know, 38,000 of them are pretty good. I don't know. I don't know all of them, but that might be a high number. But I appreciate you guys being on with us and hope to hear from you guys again. Obviously keep in touch, and I'm happy to make this connection between you two. And if any of our listeners out there want to connect, their information will be in the show notes. And again, really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.